are. Okay, well, I guess I'm recording now. So from here on out, it's being recorded. I'll upload that. Me being recorded. Yeah, we all have to consent to being recorded. There we go. Okay, well, there we go. Now I know how to record. It's being recorded now. Okay, yeah. For NMC, we use this, and I'm figuring it out because I work with federal agencies a lot, and they don't allow Zoom because of the whole like it's a Chinese company and all this stuff. So I'm not used to using it. But anyway, this is an old slide because of this is still from last week's lecture. So there is going to be a weekly quiz. So don't use this as an excuse. It's being recorded. I said it on camera. I will put a quiz up this week. Yeah, and we're going to move on to the next chapter for lecture. But I did want to answer some of your guys' questions from the other week, from last week. There are some really great questions. How do I get chat back up, man? This thing. Oh, whatever. Okay, answering some of your guys' questions. So the first one, which like really caught me off guard because I realized what a great question it was. What happens if a baby's blood type is different from the mother's and that different blood type is incompatible with the mother? This can happen if the mother was O type and the father was heterozygous, it's A or O with the recessive O. It would be a 50% chance the baby's blood would be either A or in this case, it'd be B. There'd be 50% chance it would be the dominant of the father, and therefore the mothers would reject it. Her O blood type, her immune system would be triggered by the presence of that glycoprotein on the baby's red blood cells. So the mother's immune system could attack the fetus's red blood cells, causing anemia. And it can be fatal, but there's treatments, including intrauterine blood transfusions and early delivery. So it can happen. So all the more reason to know your blood type so you can know if this is going to be an issue down the line. But yeah, absolutely can happen. Another question about flower color. Beyond color, is there a genetic basis for other flower differences within a species? So varieties of a single type of flower. And yes, this depends on the particular species we're looking at, species of flowering plant. I included a few examples. With hydrangeas, this one was interesting. This is environmental. It varies depending on soil pH. So you can get blue or pink. I'm not sure which one you get from higher pH. But that's an environmental influence. So they're genetically the same, just in different soil types, and it causes them to produce a different pigment. This other one, Combretum indicum, I'm not too familiar with this flower. It varies depending on sunlight, from white to red. It starts out at blooms white, and then as the flower ages, it gets more red due to the exposure to sunlight. So it's again an environmental influence on this one. And then we have flower spotting in camellia flowers as a result of codominance. So both colors are being expressed in a patchwork. It's like our AB blood type again. So you kind of get that spotting. So I forget what flower in particular was asked about. And I think that it was about their spotting. So I don't know if it's codominance, but here's an example in another flower of how that's caused by codominance. Here's another one, which I was, I don't know, nervous to answer. It was a tricky one to navigate, but there was a recent study done that was actually really interesting. So answers kind of maybe some evidence, not well understood. So this recent research, I guess 2 years ago now, titled Large Scale GWAS, I forget what that stands for, but it reveals insights into genetic architecture of same sexual behavior. Super interesting. They had a huge data set, and 500,000. They utilized some of those publicly available like genetic testing, like 23andMe and stuff, those companies form huge data sets and they can share with researchers and stuff like that. So that's how they got their information. And they found, well, here's just some quotes from it. Many loci underlie same-sex sexual behavior in both sexes. All tested genetic variants accounted for 8 to 25% of variation in male and female same-sex sexual behavior. It's tongue twister. And the genetic influences were positively but imperfectly correlated between the sexes. So a lot of variation there, but they did find some significant sort of correlation there. And calls into question the validity of bipolar continuum measures such as the Kinsey scale. Kinsey scale is that the spectrum of hetero to homosexuality. So of course, we say it's a spectrum, which is true, but it's also there's this is going a bit beyond biology and more to gender studies, but it's more of like a z-dimensional spectrum, and this research supported that, which is really interesting. Important to note, analysis did not include transgender persons, intersex persons, and other important persons in the group within the queer community. So only for what is that? Cisgendered individuals. Yeah, so more research needed. And you read the article there, it's all online. It was published in Nature, which is a extremely good, reliable journal, one of the super fancy science journals. The thing I liked about that article is they consulted LGBT advocacy groups, and there's a lot of authors on that from that community. So it didn't seem like they're putting those people under a microscope. I thought they handled it really well. So if you're curious, check it out. And there's how we get chat. Okay. So I hope that answers that question, or at least leads you in a direction to do more research yourself. From what I could tell, that was like the most recent, the most comprehensive article on the subject. And then genetic basis for intersex. Yeah, so this is getting into sex chromosomes. So that's why I was saying average. Average female and male mammals have XX and XY sex chromosome pairing respectively. And important to note, basis of sex, not gender. We're going to talk about sex, not gender. Gets confused all the time. Really annoying. Biologically speaking, during meiosis, the creation of gametes and the creation of gametes, there can be non-disjunction where the homologous pairs don't separate correctly. So this can happen with the autosomes and the sex chromosome. If this occurs with the sex chromosome, this can lead to a sperm or egg with an additional or lack of a sex chromosome. So you could have an egg that would have no X chromosome or XX, or you could have a sperm carrying no sex chromosomes or XY, both on a single gamete. So intersex refers to a variety of phenotypes in which both typically male and female sexual anatomy occur on a single individual. And this is often, but not necessarily, but often caused by this non-disjunction of the sex chromosome, that addition or subtraction. It's about 1% of the population. Klinefelter syndrome, that's XXY. So that creates a male karyotype. Karyotype is another word for you, like genotype, phenotype. Karyotype is the sort of the collection of chromosomes in an individual. So it's a male karyotype because it has the Y chromosome. Even though it has 2 X chromosomes, it's the Y that triggers the body to make male characteristics. But the additional X can cause symptoms such as infertility and a bunch of other ones. So about 1% of the population, and there's a lot of variations on this that can be, so you can have additional ones and still be, a healthy, relatively healthy, though some of these can cause infertility, but healthy individual. So there's some examples there. Super interesting. I didn't realize it was 1% of the population. Yeah. Any questions on those answers to your questions? I hope this demonstrates that if you guys ask me questions, I'll put in the research to answer them. No. Okay. That's a rough-skinned newt. They're extremely venomous. Not venomous, sorry, poisonous. Back home in Washington. Okay, that's it for that one. How do I? Whoop, that's what I want. Stop sharing. Doesn't look like there's any questions so far. And yes, just confirming I am recording. So I'll just, what I'll do is I'll upload this on, can I upload it on Moodle? See, this whole COVID thing is making me learn whole new things, and there's silver lining there. I'll get it up there somehow. I might upload it on my YouTube channel and then embed it. I'll figure it out. I'll message you guys when I figure that out. Okay, well, if there's no questions, I'll move on to the next lecture. Yes, I think you can. Okay, thanks for the support. I'll figure it out. Thank you. Okay, oh, that's not what I want. I want share screen. Yes, cool. So one of my favorite topics, evolution. So introduction to evolution. Oh, come on. There we go. So quick review before we jump into evolution, just so these are sort of at the front of your mind. I keep repeating this, but our genome, our entire DNA is composed of chromosomes, which would be that new word we learned, karyotype. Each chromosome containing specific genes, the variety of which cause different alleles to be expressed in a population via their traits. So your specific genetic composition, that's your genotype, and the way these are expressed, that is your appearance, is your phenotype. I'm sorry, there's a power saw outside. I hope that's not picking up. So the nitrogen-containing bases of DNA's nucleotides are what communicate information. That's the alphabet of your DNA, the A, T, G, C. And each of these nucleotides is spelling out genetic information. DNA encodes instructions to build proteins. And then proteins are what produce our traits. Like eye color, talked about in the cat, the proteins make enzymes that down the line shape our pigments, etc. So mutations are changes in the nucleotide sequence of an organism's genome, and these can be harmful, beneficial, or benign. They can be caused by things like mistakes in replication of our DNA, direct DNA damage by mutagens, and mistakes during repair, and even horizontal gene transfer from the environment or other organisms like viruses injecting DNA into us. Yeah, so they can be harmful if they reduce the fitness, which is a word we'll talk more about later on, of the individual, or beneficial if they improve that fitness, make us better in some way, faster, or produce more young, that sort of thing. Or benign, neutral, if they just don't do anything, which there's a pretty good chance they won't do anything, as we learned before, because based off of whether or not they change any significant amino acids in that polypeptide building our proteins. So mutations in gamete cells can be passed down to the next generation in the individual, and these are super rare. Oh, got a person asking for permission. Is that working? Yes, okay. So these are mutations that get into gamete cells are very rare, but through tons and tons of generations, they build up over time, no matter how rare they are. So again, the deleterious or advantageous, the good or bad nature of a mutation is dependent on whether the genotypic change affects the fitness of the organism's phenotype. So whether that gene change affects the ability for an organism to live a healthy life, essentially, and reproduce. Okay, are you able to get back in? No, let me double check. Yes. No? Yes, you're in. Okay. Okay.
Sorry, my internet is really bad. It keeps kicking me out.
No, no worries. Now I understand better why you were asking about recording. So I will be sure in the future to record all of these. So if you have trouble streaming it, or trouble joining us, then you could just stream it later on.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. And teaching me about Zoom, so win-win. Right, so we just talked about genetic disorders, different, or actually that heading shouldn't be there. Different forms of inheritance, Mendelian inheritance controlled by a single gene with 2 alleles, like the purple and white pea flowers, one of which is dominant and the other is recessive. So one of them in a heterozygous individual with a dominant and recessive, the dominant will be expressed. It'll mask that recessive. That's Mendelian inheritance. Really easy to follow. Versus codominance, traits are controlled by a single gene with 2 or more alleles, neither of which are dominant, but instead both are expressed simultaneously in a heterozygote. In the case of blood types, it's a little extra layer on there because you have a couple of dominants and 1 recessive, in this case, the O. So that can happen too, which can be a bit more complex than just that binary. Incomplete dominance, that was our snapdragon flowers. That's traits controlled by a single gene with 2 or more alleles, neither of which are dominant, excuse me. But instead both are partially expressed in a heterozygote. So in a homozygote, they'd still have that sort of that pure color, in this case, the red or white, but in a heterozygote, they would produce an intermediary, which would be pink in this case. Right, so forming a sort of phenotypic intermediary between either homozygous form. Pleiotropy, that's multiple traits influenced by the same gene. They, in the book, they show these rats, are they mice? I think they're mice, that they have a mutation for hairlessness, but also affect the mammary gland, and I forget what other gland. Oh, so a single gene that affects multiple traits. A polygene, so poly, many, a single trait influenced by multiple genes. In the case of eyes or skin pigment, there's actually a lot of genes involved in that. Sex linkage, sex chromosome specific patterns of inheritance, so like color blindness or the whatever that blood disease was the royal family has. And right, to repeat this, I know we just went over this, just the takeaway. Some traits may be selected or removed from a population due to natural selection, which we're going to get into now. So any questions before we jump right into evolution? And just a heads up, I'm going to try to keep the lectures how we've been doing, about 50 minutes, so around 6:20. I'll call it a day. Okay, so you guys are all stuck with me. I really enjoy the history of evolutionary thought, so that's what we're going to focus on for a bit before we dive into evolution. But I think with many philosophies, sciences, political thought, that sort of thing, it's not just important to understand sort of the end product of that thought, but also to understand how we got to that point, because it could sometimes reveal support for that idea or weaknesses in that idea. So evolution is a good example of that. So there's this famous quote: "Nothing in biology makes sense except in light of evolution." And this helps explain why we have, why sex is important to organisms. Like, why have sex in it except your DNA? Doesn't seem valuable unless selection is occurring, for example, and you want to acquire new traits or have your offspring acquire new traits. How we see the diversity of life we do see on the planet. Why we have this fossil record in the ground, things that don't exist anymore. All these questions have this foundation in evolution, and it really helped recontextualize a lot of sort of mysteries in the biological world. So evolution is the change over time in characteristics of a population. So We'll talk more about populations in the next lecture, but important point that evolution occurs at the population level. Population meaning all individuals of one species within an area. So again, we'll get on this more in the next lecture, but evolution occurs on populations. Individuals undergo things like natural selection or other forms of selection, like sexual selection. Oh, right, that's kind of what I said earlier. Evolution provides foundation for understanding biology, similarities, physical and genetic, and differences in diverse life forms. Why we're so genetically similar to not just physically similar things like chimps, but even more obscurely similar things like flies and that sort of thing, even plants and fungi. The adaptive significance of sexual reproduction, how and why vaccines work until they don't. As we see, hopefully not with COVID anytime soon, but things like the flu vaccine, we got to get a new one every year because resistant strains are selected and become dominant in the population, and much, much more. Oh, shoot. There we go. So to understand the origin of species, we first need to understand the origin of this evolutionary theory and how we got to where we are now. There's Darwin's famous drawing of the tree of life, by the way. All right, any questions before we jump into history? No? Okay. Yes.
In biology, does growth and evolution has a similar definition?
Let's say again, sorry.
In biology, does growth and evolution has a similar definitions?
No, I wouldn't say. So I guess growth, you said growth, right? Like GROWTH, growth. That can apply to, well, you can apply it to an individual going through maturation, or populations growing in numbers over time. So that's not necessarily true. That it's not synonymous with evolution in this case. Evolution is change in some measurable either genotypic or phenotypic difference in a population over time. So getting at the root of evolution, an idea can evolve or grow. So I guess in common vernacular outside of biology, those are sometimes synonymous, but in a biological context, I wouldn't say so. Good question though. Yeah, so evolution is a word that existed before the biological meaning. I think its original meaning is like to unravel a scroll or something like that, if I remember correctly. Any other questions? Vocal or chat is okay. No? Okay, moving forward. So evolution was not spontaneously generated. Darwin didn't just think of evolution out of nowhere. As we'll see, he didn't even talk about evolution necessarily. But developed as a theory over generations, many generations, thousands of years. So the prevailing theory, really the only explanation until relatively recently, was that some greater creator made all things as they are and life was static, that is to say unchanging. In fact, the belief until relatively recently, last couple hundred years, was not only that everything was created as is, but also that nothing could ever go extinct. So looking back, in the BCs, we have Greek and Roman philosophers like Plato who argued essentialism. This is an interesting idea that all things, inanimate and animate, so life included, are flawed. There's no perfect things, but all things are striving for an ideal form and move gradually towards that ideal form. Then Aristotle, who was a student of Plato, kind of advanced this thought, categorizing life according to what he believed was a hierarchy towards an ideal form. So you can see on the picture, this is from our textbook, inanimate objects became the lower plants, your ferns and things like that, mosses and such that were, in his eyes, I guess, basically inanimate because they weren't doing anything. And then up to higher plants that were flowering. So I guess they were more complex and beautiful in his eyes, et cetera, et cetera. Getting into animals, up into more complex animals until we have us. It's always us. We're always the perfect ones in these people's thoughts. So a little abstract, but essentialism, that idea that everything's striving to be more perfect, will come up again. I want to make this note because the textbook doesn't. It's important to note that although much of the surviving literature and history regarding biological theory and philosophy pertaining to evolution and other sciences too is very Western, we're talking about European thinkers for the most part. It's by no means limited to Western scholars. And things like the Chinese Taoist philosopher, I hope I pronounced this right, Zhuang Zhao, also, is that around their time? Yeah, around Plato and Aristotle's times. His writings included discussions of transmutation of species, so gradual change from one to another, with tinges of essentialism that they're improving to an ideal form. Then you have the Arab philosopher and social scientist Ibn Khaldun, so much more recent, 1,000 years ago. Similar transmutation theory, also reminiscent of their essentialism. He believed it went from like matter, just this vague idea of matter, to vapor or gases to water, and then water eventually becomes minerals, and then minerals eventually transmute into coral, I guess, because corals, like marine corals like we have out in the lagoon, corals are rock-like, I guess, in his eyes. Corals to plants, and then plants to animals. Interestingly, his belief was that the date tree was the highest form of plant before we got to animals. I guess corals excluded. So those are two examples. There's, I'm sure there's a lot more, but the literature is scarce. Getting a little dark. I'm gonna turn the light on so you guys can see okay. There's still lights on my back, so it doesn't help. So yeah, I just want to include that. Literature is scarce on it, but it's not as if this only came out of Europe. In fact, a lot of the great scientific thinkers in the early ADs were from the Arab region. And a bunch of bad stuff happened, crusades, all that, burnt down the Library of Alexandria. We lost all the information. But anyway, moving back to a bunch of European white dudes. So development of evolutionary thinking came from a multidisciplinary background, biology and subdisciplines of biology like zoology and botany, taxonomy, paleontology, and importantly, geology. One early example, not really compared to the other ones, but sort of the more modern thinking was English naturalist named John Ray. He was an early taxonomist. He grouped plants on their similarities and differences. So it's just even this was a new idea of trying to group life together. And he came up with a first biological definition of species, which is another favorite topic of mine that we'll get into in a later lecture. But what is a species? Then you have French naturalist and mathematician, big long French name, but just commonly called Buffon. He believed all life was created at once, yet gradually changed, improved or degenerated over time due to environmental factors or random chance, not fandom chance. Typo there. And then you have Linnaeus, Swedish taxonomist, established Linnaean taxonomy that we still use today. That's your kingdom, class, well, in his day, kingdom, class, order, genus, species, but now it's domain, kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species, and subspecies and subfamilies and all sorts of stuff. He believed all life. No, he believed all life was created as is. This idea of immutability, that nothing changes. He was also advocate that things don't. A lot of these guys were advocates that things can't go extinct. The basic idea was that God would not let any of his creations go extinct. But once people started digging up fossils, we'll see that kind of created some friction in that theory. So we believe life was static, and we still use Linnaean taxonomy today. It's outdated, but we really stick to it. It doesn't really make sense in the genetic age that we're in. And Linnaeus was he was a jerk for a lot of reasons, a lot of petty, and then a lot of systemic reasons. Anyway, read more about Linnaeus. He's an interesting character. He named a lot of his like contemporaries that kind of contested his theories. He'd name like ugly animals after them and like weeds and stuff like that. It's a very passive aggressive approach to academic debate. Then you have this guy, English physician naturalist Erasmus Darwin. That's Darwin's grandfather. So Darwin wasn't even the first in his family to talk about evolution. He wrote of evolutionary concepts in his medical work, the Zoonomia. Here's a quote from that: "The strongest and most active animal should propagate the species, which should thence become improved." So kind of sort of talking around the idea of natural selection. Interesting dude. He wrote a lot of his like sciencey ideas in poetry. Like organic life beneath the shoreless waves was born and nursed in ocean's pearly caves. Yeah, very I don't know. I dig the science poetry. But he was Darwin was very much like very, I don't think Puritan's the right word for it, but he was very reserved. His grandfather was not. He was a womanizer. He had a lot of mistresses and had a lot of kids out of wedlock and with married women. He was an interesting character. Basically everyone on here, they're all super weirdos and they have very storied lives. And I don't know, fun sort of wiki rabbit holes if you want to go down. And there's some interesting books on these different characters' lives. I have one of the Linnaeus ones on my shelf. I'm excited to read. Shoot, we're already at 6:20. Yeah, okay. So next lecture, I'll get into this one of the first big changes in evolutionary thought is this acceptance of extinction. That is the termination of a taxa, the extinction of a species, for example, pictured here, extinction of a woolly mammoth or mastodon. But we'll get into that next time. Thank you guys for being patient with me as I figure out Zoom and this whole online thing. I think only half of this lecture will be recorded. I don't think it'll like backlog anything. But future ones, please remind me. I'm just gonna say that. I know I'm gonna forget. Let me know at the start of the next lecture to record it, and then I'll get those uploaded, and I'll get these slides online too. And I'll get Group A's lab info up tonight or tomorrow morning, and that'll be due. We'll make it due on Sunday. In fact, I think I have my last slide talks about that. Spoilers. There we go. So yeah, to do review chapter 15, all about evolution. There's a natural selection worksheet due on Saturday. Weekly quiz. There is a weekly quiz. And then Group A, you'll do the virtual evolution lab and submit that on Moodle. I'll get all that information up soon. And our next class is Thursday. That'll be online by Zoom, and I'll keep you guys updated as far as if we'll be back in the classroom anytime soon. Any questions?
When is the quiz available?
I usually get them up around the lab day, so by Wednesday.
Okay. And they're
I'm gonna be honest, I haven't even written it yet. I forget. I haven't done a quiz for a couple of weeks and I've already forgotten. Whenever I usually make the quiz due, is that Friday night or do I switch that to Saturday? I remember I feel like I did make
Saturday.
Saturday. Okay.
Saturday.
All right. I'll make it due Saturday. So change that
Thank you.
to 20. Is Zoom meeting for lab? No, it's an independent thing. It's a self-guided lab. I'll send that information out. It's a fun little like online learning about Anole lizards in the Caribbean, where they're native. We actually have them here. They're introduced, but they're native to the Caribbean, and they have interesting ecotypes and speciation going on. So no Zoom for the lab, but please, if you have any questions for the lab, you can email me or message me on Moodle, and I'll answer as soon as I can. And again, it's due on Sunday, so you don't have to have it done by lab day, by tomorrow. You have more time on that. But yeah, please just shoot me a message or email if you have any questions. So no Zoom tomorrow.
Thank you.
Anything else? Yep. Cool. All right, I guess we're good for the day. Thanks, everyone. Stay safe. Wash your hands. Wear a mask. All those things.
Enjoy the rest
Good
of
night.
your evening.
Thanks. You all too.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Zach.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Night.
You too.
How do I save this recording?